This is Breezy, the first game I released on Steam. Breezy came out about 1 year ago, and as they say, hindsight is 20/20. So I want to look back on Breezy's development for anyone who's thinking of making their own game. I'll be covering the mistakes I made as well as some of my successes. So let's wind the clock back at the beginning of development and get started. Oh, but first, the Steam summer sale is going on, so you can buy Breezy right now for only $1. Just keep that in mind. My first long-term game project, as in longer than a game jam, was a mobile game called Wing It, which I released in February of 2021. I covered that game in a video I made last month, so I won't go over it here. The point is, I was very satisfied with that project, especially since it only took 3 months to make. I had done everything right, from prototyping to planning to polish, and I felt like I was ready for a bigger game, maybe even a Steam release. So I started brainstorming ideas for this next game, starting with my old jam games. Well, we had The Switcher, a puzzle platformer where you switch two objects on opposite sides of you. This one was fun as a jam game, but I got the feeling I wouldn't be able to make enough puzzles for a full release. Next up was Blowhole, a very simple arcade-style game where you play as a whale shooting water at birds. Again, pretty fun, but I made that game very simple on purpose, so I didn't know how I could expand it. The same goes for Color-O-Lock, an odd game about swapping between dimensions. My next jam game was a little more promising, an RPG called Wordless where you fight enemies by typing. This one had the potential to be a full game, but I realized that with my 10th grade programming skills, the code would be a pile of spaghetti after about a week. Then there was Breezy. This one was actually pretty good. This was my entry for the 2020 iteration of the GMTK Game Jam, and the idea was golf, but instead of aiming the swings, you control the wind using the arrow keys. Each level you got 2 or 3 preset trajectories, and you had to use the wind to guide the ball towards the hole. This idea was simple enough to be easy to code, but complex enough to keep players interested for a full game. Okay, so we've got our game. Most of my jam games up to that point had post-jam versions with a little extra content, but Breezy never got one. So I thought, instead of just adding a couple more levels, what if I spent the summer making an expanded version, say 2 courses with 18 holes each. I could even try out 3D game development, which I hadn't touched since this rollerball tutorial. I was already scheming up a 3D pixel art aesthetic inspired by A Short Hike and DS games, and the jam version would act as a prototype so I could get started with development even faster. I wouldn't even need a design document or any kind of plan, since having this prototype would inform my development process. Huh? What's that alarm doing here? Probably nothing. Anyway, it's time to get started with this 3D Breezy. I made Breezy's first level the same way I made pretty much all of them, using Unity's terrain system, which lets you sculpt somewhat natural-looking terrain. I made a block of terrain in roughly the same shape as the levels in Breezy Classic. Those were vertical rectangles, which are pretty easy to parse visually. I duplicated this and changed the texture and material to make sand. And of course, I had to have fun with the different terrain brushes. You can make stars, rough patches, and of course, hills and valleys. I even added a tiny pool of water. For the grass texture, I drew a striped fairway in Scratch, which I was still using for graphics at the time. I also made the golf ball texture so I could start on the game loop. The main script for the ball is called, well, ball.cs. The code started out pretty simple, so I only ever did one version with minor refactoring changes. Spoiler alert, I definitely regret not rewriting it now. The script is a total mess after making a whole game with it. This is one reason why you should plan your games. I store the swing trajectories in a list called hits, which is edited in a separate game object in the level. When you press space, the hit counter increases, and the game checks this list to see where the ball should go. Pretty soon I also had arrows that would point towards this trajectory. I also added the ability to control the wind, although there was an embarrassing glitch here for a long time. Instead of the wind blowing north and south like you'd think, I accidentally coded it to blow up and down. Whoops. I also added the pixelated 3D effect I mentioned, which brings us to the very first devlog. That's right, after making devlogs for Wing It, I decided to do it again in this game, starting with this fairly early state. If you want a more in-depth look at the game's development, you can go watch them, but they're a bit of a slog. After that though, I started working on some actual levels. Sorry, weird prototype level, your time is up. At the same time, I also added some post-processing and changed this ugly skybox to a nice blue. I made a title screen which started out as a gross green background until I changed it to show a preview of the level, like the current version. The level select was a lot different though. Besides that fun UI stuff, I finished the grass course levels and made some music in LMMS, an open source audio workstation I used to use. But at that point it was time for me to head off to a lengthy summer program halfway across the state, so I would have less time to work on Breezy. I assumed the game was about halfway done at this point, so I wasn't too worried about it, even if it did slow me down. Once I got back, the game was fairly polished and the grass course was done, but it didn't really feel like a full game. It barely had more levels than the jam version, so I added the rewind mechanic where you can press backspace to try your last swing again, along with some settings accessible on the title screen, and I fixed that bug with the wind direction. Still though, it felt like a prototype, not a quote-unquote real game. course, it was at this point that I should have written up a plan to finish up development. And surprisingly, I did. Here's an example of my weekly development plan from September. 3 devlogs in a week. Imagine that. And here's the weekly plan from the week after that. I'd show you the one from the week after that, but I only made these plans for 2 weeks before giving up. Not a good sign. In the meantime, though, I decided to add a second course, the beach course, to round off the levels and get the game ready for release in spring of 2022. A year of development, plenty of time for polish, perfect. In preparation for said release, I decided to make the breezy Halloween demo, which had 12 of the grass course levels, 6 of the new beach course levels, and 6 brand new Halloween themed levels. In the meantime, I kept working on the beach course, adding these boats and bouncy umbrellas. Pretty soon we were up to 2 courses of 18 holes. But finishing the beach course brought on a few changes. First, the asset heavy new course made me more confident in my 3D art skills, confident enough that I didn't feel the need to hide behind this pixel art aesthetic anymore. At this point, the game pretty much looks like the current version, but that leads me to the second point. The game looks fine, but when playing it, it didn't feel like a finished Steam release. Good thing I planned all that time for polish. I started by adding more characters, which multiplied the playtime without adding extra levels. I also added Remix Rush, a randomizer mode where you play a gauntlet of 10 levels as random characters. I remade the game's music in OpenMPT, which made me realize that I needed an avenue for all this scrapped content. So I implemented the Golden Teas, which are scattered around hidden spots in the levels and unlock various bonus items, like those old songs on the Halloween demo levels, as well as the other characters. So at this point I'd reached that planned release period of spring 2022, but I realized that now I had this whole polished game with only 2.5 courses of content, so I spent the summer I decided to add 4 more courses on top of the existing 2, for 6 in total. Along with the Halloween levels, that should be plenty of content, so I started on the game's 3rd course, the Ice course. This one's faster than the first 2, with the main mechanic being the slippery ice you have to maneuver the ball through. In later levels, you dodge ice stalactites that threaten to tip over. It's challenging enough to be a fun mid-game course, and I really like the Mario Kart-esque song for it. And since it was summer, I was able to speed through the level design process. Most days I made 2 levels per day, alongside other miscellaneous coding and polish. It helped that I didn't have a job or any other commitments, so I was basically doing this full time. After finishing the Ice course, I moved on to the City course, which was back to slower, more puzzling gameplay. With these buttons and moving platforms, this course almost feels like Portal at times. The devlog I made for this course also gained a little traction, 50 views, which felt very motivating. At this point, I was falling into a groove of level design. Even though coding the moving platforms was a hassle, the City course was really fun to make. I even included a boss fight to end off the course, complete with a brand new song. Then came the Disco course. Nearing the end of the game, I wanted to switch things up, so this one plays like a rhythm game, where you press the hit button again in midair to ground pound into these dash panels. Again, getting these to coordinate with the music was a hassle, but I leveraged my custom music manager script and it wasn't too bad. Then finally, the last set of levels, the Volcano course. This one is functionally very similar to the beach course, with these chaotic drafts instead of umbrellas and bomb rocks instead of boats. The bomb rocks even include a little custom camera effect along with some slow-mo to make them easier to use and more dramatic. I tried to strike a balance of intense but beatable throughout the course. If you replace the lava with water and traded the fiery music for something more calm, it would feel a lot easier. But now we're at the very last level. I wanted to do something special for this one, a custom modeled volcano that you have to climb up. That makes this level the only one not to use that typical rectangular terrain, which is super memorable and neat. In fact, looking back, this is one moment where I failed to plan. If I had tried out a level like this during the prototyping phase, I would have realized how fun it is and changed the game's direction. It would have been really neat to have 20 or 30 larger levels like this instead of over 100 similar looking holes. Anyway, after clearing the volcano, the game ends, as does this long summer of level design. So we have all the content in the game, but now it doesn't feel polished enough for a full Steam release. Well, I've got a whole school year ahead of me, so I could at least spend that time polishing the game, then release it in spring of 2023. So, let's finish this. Back at school, I was playtesting the game a lot in my spare time, as well as having my friends playtest it. During this period, I started thinking about the player experience. Some players will treat this game like a marathon, going at it from start to finish. Other players will hopefully revisit it casually, over and over. I needed to cater to both. So for that first set of players, I decided to make an opening and closing cutscene to bookend the game for a satisfying experience. I blocked out the cutscenes in Metamoji Note, then drew over them in GIMP, adding color, before organizing them with dialogue in Unity. The opening cutscene establishes our protagonist, Mr. Cowley, as well as his opponent, Mr. Martinez. It doesn't answer the question of how they get to the beach, or a disco, or an active volcano, but I wanted to leave the lore a little open-ended. The closing cutscene is just a short conversation to wrap up that story and transition into the credits, as long as you've beaten everything level with the golf ball. Also, these credits are probably way too long since I made the song before actually writing them, but you can hold down the enter key to skip them, so I'm not too worried. For that second set of players, those who want to revisit the game casually, I decided to expand Remix Rush by adding a set of 10 random modifiers that show up on certain levels, kind of like Classic Mode in Smash Bros, where you randomly have to fight a giant Luigi. Some of these modifiers are simpler, like low gravity, and some are more complicated, like these turrets that track the ball and fire lasers periodically. Finally, I added something that would benefit all players, additional golden teas for more unlockable content. I added some songs that were originally made for other projects, or just for fun. I also added some in-development versions of other songs, like the version of the disco course theme I made in GarageBand as a prototype. Finally, I also added the Moon course as the final unlockable set of levels. This was the most intense and difficult course yet, with lowered gravity, rings to travel through, and UFOs that hijack the ball. Luckily, since this is the last course in the game, puzzle design was a bit easier since I could mix and match elements from previous courses. But wait a minute. At this point, I realized that this school year was supposed to be for final polish, but instead I was introducing yet more scope creep. I needed to finish this game for real. So, in April, I got the Steam page up. Nothing fancy, but it's got all the required components, including some nice screenshots and the game's trailer. Later on, I added a demo to the page. Not the Halloween demo, but a real demo, with the full grass course and one unlockable character. I also tried a little experiment with my devlogs, switching out the full-length videos for hashtag shorts. I called them micro devlogs, and they did a lot better than my regular videos. Sure, they gained roughly the same amount of views, but they were really easy to make, so I got all those views several times a week. I also started a marketing campaign on Twitter and Reddit, where previously I was just posting GIFs on GameJolt. Soon after publishing the Steam page, I set the concrete release date of June 30th, 2023, over 2 years after beginning the game and about a month and a half after graduating high school. In that month and a half, I started working a part-time job, but I still had plenty of free time to work on the game, and most of this time was spent appeasing Steam, adding achievements, cloud saves, and the rest. I also made the last-minute decision to expand the Halloween course from 6 holes to 18, adding these ghostly walls that act like the Boo for Mario. A lot of work, but I got it all in by release day, concluding everything with one final marketing push before hitting release my game. Initial sales weren't great, especially with that steep $6 price tag, although the launch discount pushed it down to $5 for a while. After a few months, I reduced the price to $2, but the damage had already been done. I still haven't sold enough copies to reach the $100 minimum payout. So why did this game fail? Well, first off, it didn't. I learned a lot of valuable lessons from Breezy, even if I had to learn them the hard way. I also had a neat project to put on my resume and college applications, but that's not what we're talking about. Why didn't the game make any money? Well, after a lot of pondering, I realized that the game didn't really have a marketable hook. Sure, golf but you control the wind is fun for a game jam, but it's a hard sell for a full Steam release. I also didn't market the game nearly as much as I should have. I didn't create a Discord server, I only reached out to about 10 YouTubers and streamers, none of whom answered me, and my social media campaigns were pretty laughable. But I still want to see this game succeed, so a while after release, I announced that I was beginning work on a relaunch, with 2 more courses and 4-player multiplayer, which brings us up to now. So by now you can tell how unplanned this game's development was. Making Breezy was a constant cycle of make content, then polish the game, then make more content. And every time I tried to break that cycle, it only lasted for a few weeks, and it often led to even more time commitments like the Moon course. If I had planned the game starting in spring 2021, I would have had to ask myself the question of scope, but even then I wouldn't have known how long the content and polish would take. A proper prototype would have helped with that, so that's why I preach prototyping and planning, not one or the other. The relaunch is different, but similar in many ways. I started out the relaunch by setting up very clear boundaries. 2 more courses, add multiplayer, marketing, and that's it. But the work itself has been largely unstructured, on purpose. For a while I didn't want to burn myself out on a 3rd year of Breezy development, so I've been taking my time, splicing Breezy development between other projects and prototypes. Now though, I'm at the final push, and I'm scheduling out the rest of the work leading up to the relaunch, and we're pretty close. The first new course, the Ancient Pyramid, is done, and the second one, the Special Shrine, is nearing completion. The basics of multiplayer are in, but there are a lot of details that still need to be fleshed out, and kinks that need to be smoothed over. I've stated it in other videos, but I'm ready to be done with this game. Even still, I appreciate the experience it's given me with Unity, C#, 3D modeling, marketing, YouTube, and most importantly, planning. And this relaunch is going to put all of those to the test. So, That's the game dev journey. I was considering making one more video to cover my game jams and prototypes since 2021, but I've made individual videos about most of those and I'm still fairly proud of them, so I'll leave it here for now. If you've been watching the entire series, thanks for coming along, and if not, consider going back and catching up on the series. Over these 6 months, I've had the chance to reminisce on the 10 years I spent making games, to see them as an unbroken, if shaky, line. Even if the beginning of Breezy's development was flawed, I never would have gotten there if not for my poorly named, barely functional Contact Enemy projects, or my unfun Scratch games. But with this series behind me, what's next for the channel? Well, as I mentioned, I'm ramping up Breezy's development, so I'm hoping I can put out some more devlogs. You guys also really seem to like my more advice-centered videos, so expect more of those in the future. And of course, whenever I start getting serious enough with Steam Game number 2, you'll hear about it. And who knows? At some point I might have enough material for another entry in this series. Oh, one more thing. If you've watched this whole video, you're definitely a hardcore Mondobi fan, so listen up. For my next video, I want to play your games and critique them. I'm not a huge influencer, but I bet there are plenty of people watching my videos who would enjoy your game. So if you've got a game you want me to play, join my Discord server and put it in the Octothorpe Your Games channel, as long as I don't have to pay money for it. So itch.io link, Steam keys, or demos are fair game. And finally, don't forget to pick up Breezy for just $1. Have a good day.